And then we'll do introductions. So we've met with some subsets of you, mostly Jay and Dan, right? And Diane. The most consistently, I think every single time, there's been the two of you. And others we've met before when we came out to Rio Rancho. And then we reconvened here, based on what we heard from you and we saw out in the city and said, reviewing all of our outreach engagements, what do we want to take on? And everyone agreed Rio Rancho was at least interesting, if not, wonderful case for us to be involved with. And we really appreciate the invitation and the enthusiasm for the potential of collaboration between the city and the school. So what we want to do today then is, having decided that, in a way, is talk about what the priority projects might be, what the nature of the engagement might be, talk, from your side, and also what our capacity is, what we could bring to those projects. We talk a little bit about timing and something about funding. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so with that, why don't we start with Paula, and go around and do introductions.
All right, my name is Paula Scott, and I'm one of the Arts Commissioners for the City of Rio Rancho.
I'm Daryl Bass. I'm a Commissioner for the City of Rio Rancho.
And the co-chair.
And co-chair.
I'm Daniel Chamberlain. I'm District 3 Arts Commissioner for the City of Rio Rancho. And I chair the commission.
I'm Diane Saulnier. I am the Resource Development Manager for the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department of the City of Rio Rancho.
I'm Elise Royal. I'm an intern with the Parks Commission in Rio Rancho.
And I'm Jay Hart. I'm the Director of the City of Rio Rancho's Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department. We do provide staff support for the Art Commission. And we have a number of departments consolidated under Parks and Recreation, including Keep Rio Rancho Beautiful, our parks and community centers, and our senior center.
I'm Jim Arrowsmith. I'm the Planning and Zoning Manager for the City of Rio Rancho.
Michael Kilroy, Development Services, Planner, former UNM student.
I'm Mark Childs. I'm an architecture faculty, and I'm the director of our Urban and Regional Design Certificate Program, which we just changed the name of. I changed the name, but I can never remember what it is.
I'm Michael Pride, architecture faculty and associate dean for public outreach and engagement.
Elf Simon, landscape architecture faculty and associate dean for research.
Geraldine Forbes Seiss, architecture faculty, but also dean of the school.
I'm Jeff Adams, architecture faculty and director of the architecture program.
Okay, great. And I think we'll be joined, almost on cue. Good morning. Rick, you walked in just in time to introduce yourself, so when you sit down, great part if you want to before you grab your...
How about if I introduce you while you get your stuff?
Thanks.
This is Rick Richardson. He is the Director of Community and Regional Planning for the school.
Perfect.
So the one outstanding member of our leadership team is Eric Bernard, who is the Director of Landscape Architecture, who unfortunately has a class once a week on Friday mornings. So to my chagrin, we happen to capture that moment, but we'll just carry on.
And we have an absentee member in the Southern Sandoval Road Flood Control Agency.
That's right.
They're part of this as well.
Right.
Captain Conrad's going to try and fill that.
Okay.
They had a conference, they're all gone, so they couldn't send anyone at all. But they really want to be involved in what we do, so that's going to, I think it's going to help you guys the most. But take full advantage there.
Right.
So with that, perhaps you've had a chance, we had conversations about so many things while we were together out in Rio Rancho. We looked at the city center, we looked at the commercial retail center, we talked about transportation, we talked about linkages of public space between nodes or centers or activity areas. We talked about flood control and water management generally. We talked about sustainability. So that was a long list. I mean, I know if you've had a chance to think about what would be the most important issues that you think you could contribute to, which I put up there.
I think that when you look at the city, each of our different departments represented here, they all kind of have their own kind of play on that. And I'd like to hear from all of us what our priorities are, personally and then from their departments.
Okay, great.
You can do the go round. That'd be fine.
Sounds good.
Actually, I outlined a lot of what you said on the handout, the top.
Oh, you should do it. I wasn't even cheating and reading.
No, you did good.
Right. Okay.
You did real good. Yeah, I know everyone's excited about this, so I'm trying to figure out where to go from here.
Right. Yeah, how to start, where to start. So which department would like to start, Jim?
Well, kind of start, not that we're prepared to start, but I'm scratching down a lot of notes, and in Parks and Recreation, of course, we're all over the city, and we're involved in a lot of different things. And in Rio Rancho, I believe we have a really nice park system that adds to the quality of life in Rio Rancho. And we want to do a better job celebrating our parks and marketing our parks, as well as our programs that the parks and facilities support. I think one of the really nice things about Rio Rancho is the openness that people like, and the views from Rio Rancho. And so, Daniel has kind of touched on some of this about an open space system or a large open space element within Rio Rancho, and how would that kind of encourage really direct development, so to speak, in a positive way. So I think that there needs to be attention to the natural environment in Rio Rancho, some attention to that, and we need to capture the value of that, because sometimes it's hard to communicate or articulate value when it comes to aesthetics or quality of life. And so I think there's an importance in doing that. I would like to see us to look at connections of systems, parks, points of interest, in communities. There are subdivisions and neighborhoods, with regards to getting around the city, alternative modes of transportation, walkability, use of non-motorized methods of transportation is of interest. And then a few years ago, and Diane can talk a lot more about this, the city council convened a aesthetics task force. And I don't know if we provided you with that document from the aesthetics task force, but it would be a very important document, I think, for everyone to take a look at, because they did a lot. It was a citizens board, but they looked at a lot of how can we add value and beautify the community, and particularly our corridors and our entry points into the city. So there are a lot of people that come to Rio Rancho for various reasons. Maybe they're coming to an event at Santa Ana Star Center, so you see a long stream of traffic coming in and out of the city. Well, our corridors aren't necessarily the most attractive things that, I think people just are so used to it, they ignore what they're seeing. They're just going to a destination, and they're not enjoying the trip to the destination, quite frankly. So, with that, that's what I have to say to get us started.
I think Parks and Rec has a very unique position in this young city. They cover a lot of ground, so to speak. They do more than just, a finite Parks and Rec department does. They're very well interconnected. They have a large staff. They do a lot of the maintenance work around the city. They take care of the city. They're a big part of that, more so than I think other cities.
I really am impressed by the third element that you put out here in terms of not just marketing your parks, not just linking your open spaces, but realizing that by doing this, you can actually begin to capitalize, and build on the natural quality that is there, and to really make that perhaps a hallmark of the city if you do it correctly, right? And we've been talking about the opportunity to work on links as well, so that's great. Thank you.
And just to, just so everybody knows, SCAFCA is a major player in this. SCAFCA is probably one of the single largest landholders within the municipal city limits. And SCAFCA has taken the approach of right now of keeping their Arroyo system in a natural condition, a natural state, and not hardlining those areas and letting them meander to a certain degree. And so there's over 100 miles of either owned or fee simple Arroyo corridors right now, even without Rio Rancho estates being added into the mix, and that's all the land west of Rio Rancho and between the Rio Porco that's in the county adjacent to the city. But as the city grows, it will grow in that direction, and there's a lot of land, and it goes all the way to the Rio Porco, which is another kind of a important feature that we have and has been studied.
There may be a way to convert that kind of liability of those arroyos into an asset.
Would you say that between Parks and Recreation and SCAFCA, those two entities manage most of the public space of Rio Rancho? Yes.
You don't include roads, if you don't include Rocky Streets and right-of-way limits.
And you might throw the school district into the mix. They are another large land
Yeah, that is
holder.
true.
Yeah, and they're actually they're kind of it's a really good school district, and they have a lot of money. So it's employee-wise and financially, they may actually be bigger than the city.
Okay, great. Who wants to go next?
If I could. For those of you who saw at the last meeting in Rio Rancho, I might say a couple of things that you had already heard, but one thing that stands out the most to me, because I have been trying to work on the concepts of sustainability for the city, and it's more on city operations, because with the other things I do, I don't quite have the time or the resources to try and look at a community approach. But as Jay had mentioned, we did have the Aesthetics and Quality of Life Task Force that had convened and had put together a really nice concept for the city. The underlying message there, as well as a bit of the underlying message from our 2005 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, is this concept of creating a sense of place. And I think that's something that the Art Commission is also very keenly interested in, because we constantly come up against this question of, who is Rio Rancho? Are we Intel? Are we AMREP? Are we antiquated plating? All of these things sort of define us and they limit us. And it would be awesome to see if people with fresh minds and fresh ideas could take a look at some of these barriers that we have and kind of put them on their head and turn them into, even as Daniel had said, turn it into an asset. Because the antiquated plating is not going to go away. And then some of the other political issues, those aren't going to go away. But in order to create a sense of place and use the infrastructure and some of the plans and information that we already have to build on that, or even take that off the table and really think out of the box, we might need that because, again, some of the basic issues that we face directly impact how we're growing. We grow where people can assemble land. And so we've really done well at nodal development, and we are true suburbia, but it's not really sustainable, and we keep kind of hitting our heads against that. And since we can't really go out and condemn it all, what are our options to work with? Either, is infill the best way, is redevelopment, because we've got some very old neighborhoods for us, very old is 30, 35 years, but they're really starting to wear, and I think that they could do with some revitalization. Is there ways to look at areas to provide services for people where we've already got our parks? We are kind of like meeting places within those neighborhoods because thankfully in many of them we do have parks. We don't always have recreation centers, we don't always have churches, and we certainly don't have economic centers. It was up until just a few years ago that we ever had a gas station north of Southern Boulevard, it seemed. And it's a huge city, so we do have a lot of potential, but I think creating a sense of place and kind of thinking outside of the box is going to help us get to where we need to go, because so many of the other things that are already confining us, we keep redefining ourselves by what's confining us. Because as a city, we don't have a lot of power to get outside of that box.
That's a great line.
So,
if you can spin that way.
I don't even remember what I said.
Well, defining yourself by what's constraining yourself.
Yeah.
You can't do that, and clearly, but I mean, just being able to capture that in a real pithy way, we can spin that and actually begin to use it as a way of maybe synthesizing some of your ideas.
And the other thing that I think we are poised to do is, I think with a lot of other communities in the nation, I think the next bubble, since our housing bubble has already collapsed, I think that we're on the way, strategically, I'm cynical by the way, is that now the next bubble is going to be healthcare. We're going to bank on human health. And so we're going to develop businesses around human health. And Rio Rancho is kind of close to that. We've got 2 new hospitals, we've got 2 new urban centers that are going to be based around support businesses for health. But something that Parks and Recreation is doing that's a little bit more unique is we're looking at our facilities as how to be preventative for healthcare. We're looking at prescription trails. How can we get people out there? Maybe can we bank on social capital and health capital in a different way? And the types of connections that Jay's talking about so that people can have alternate modes of transportation. We've already conducted a bicycle and pedestrian transportation master plan. We have a comp plan. We have a parks and rec plan. We have an aesthetic quality of life task force. We have all these plans. And the sad thing is that we don't have a lot of capital to do follow through. And so when I first started with the city in 1998, I had a budget of like $18,000 and I had a lot of programs to operate. I did everything with volunteerism, donations, and outreach. And I don't know if there's ways to utilize, again, sort of like the social capital of the city and create hubs for that, so that maybe we can leapfrog some of those things that are constraining us. And again, that's very idealistic, but I'm like, hey, this is about creating things and being innovative, right? So.
In a way, the developments are like a cancer right now. They just keep, popping up. And Parks and Rec always has a little donut hole in the middle. There's no connectivity, and those rooftops start sucking, the utility infrastructure out of the city. And we've got to figure out a way to flip that. I think as we go around, you can start seeing, if you think about this as an ecology, the city as an ecology, we can start to see how some of these pieces can support some of the other pieces and convert that into equity somehow. I like these ecological concepts.
Yeah.
I know they're kind of trendy right now, but they work.
Yes,
They're actually,
that's why they're trendy.
yeah, well, they work though.
Or that's why they're popular.
Yeah.
So Dan, do you want to go next then? From the
Well, sure, from the Arts Commission. Well, the Rio Rancho Arts Commission is tasked with improving our quality of life in the city through art and public places. And that's essentially why we thought this effort would really help the city build on its urban fabric. We think arts have a place in everything that goes on, whether it's in planning, whether we were just talking about murals and signage and ordinances, and if arts have a place at the table and that's kind of where we're coming from. I think we want to see a much more united, interconnected, place. And actually, the cognitive image of the city it isn't there. It's so vague. I think that's what we want to see. We want to see something organic start to grow that's sustainable, and we can start contributing. What's going to happen is all that positive energy is going to flow in and through the Arts Commission, and we're going to start getting support, and hopefully we can start developing value in those places through art.
Question
go.
about your 1% funding. Do you have other funding? What's the mechanism?
When we have bonds, we have 1%. And our last bond failed. We were ready, but we did our budget. But
Well, that's a really good point. Our last bond failed, and the council recently rejected by vote not to even issue another GO bond, even though our roads and infrastructure are failing. So right now, the climate is reluctancy to tax the residents additionally. So there's that's going to be something.
And that was a renewal bond?
Renewal.
So they voted down the renewal to reduce
They voted down the renewal, and then they skipped a cycle, and then now then they recently looked at it. So even though it may be a renewal, it's gone a couple cycles. So now it's not necessarily a renewal.
well,
So there's no other funding base for it?
No, and you know what? Our commission has operated on zero for years, and it doesn't. We know that. We expect that the political climate will always be changing, but we don't think that that doesn't change the fact that art has a place in the city.
No, I'm just
And
trying to
I can
understand
tell you
the
that
mechanisms.
the business leaders in the city have some personal commitment to art, and we're fostering and building on that. And that will all come along, but we all have to, we've got to raise the value of everything for everybody to start putting in.
So let me just ask a slightly charged question, but not because I'm trying to be political, but I'm trying to understand.
Just let it out.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, it seems to me that you're in a situation right now where you have a fairly progressive, at this level, leadership in your city, and certainly working together, right? But it also appears that you have a relatively conservative elected official
Well,
world,
we have a
right?
ceiling. We do have a ceiling,
At
but
least fiscally,
Yeah, but yes, yes,
conservative,
Yes.
right? Are they, on the other hand, so they're fiscally conservative, but are they also conservative in terms of their vision for the city?
okay, so here's the deal. The city council created the Arts Commission to do what we're doing here.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm going to flip that right around, and they just did this. I mean, it's only been 3 years. So this is new. They're expecting, we do reports to them. They expect, progress from us, and it actually energizes them.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So did they support verbally, publicly, the bond? measure and the people voted it in?
No, they voted it down. It never,
Well, and it wasn't because of the bond, I mean, the 1% for the arts, but our road structure is very old and it requires a lot of money. So I think the thought behind not approving that bond was it's not enough to hardly get us started. And you have all the people in the city thinking that I'm voting for this bond and all my roads are going to get fixed, but that's not the reality. So, you know, as far as what is the solution going to be in regards to addressing something that needs to get addressed, I don't know. It's a work in progress, you know, and they can put the bond cycle back in before it's coming due, so.
I think in our business now, and I don't think it's going to change, it may even continue to move towards this direction. I think that we're always challenged and we're always going to have to get better at quantifying the value of these types of things within a community. And that's what elected officials understand. And it's got to be a bigger picture. I think it's just not good roads and a strong police force that reason why people want to live in a community. But just to stand here and say that parks have value or that art has value means nothing. It's got to be quantified somehow. And I think that has to be part of the process of what we're talking about here today.
So one of the things we did before we approached you, or kind of while we were approaching you, is I went to the city manager, Keith Riesberg, and we talked about doing this. And you know, he has a planning background, and he's all for this. I mean, actually, he's not here because he's in another meeting, but otherwise he would be present. Political support, I don't think is a problem for us. It is not a problem. We've been so well received by everyone in the city. It's wonderful. It's just, you know, their hands are tied with a lot of things right now.
Okay. Thank you. We do have some bond money that comes to us through the New Mexico Art and Public Places, depending on when something is built and how it is funded. It's pocket change, but you know, there is a little bit out there.
Yeah. So Hewlett Packard was a state economic development project, and there was money in there for that. And when UNM does their projects, there's a component.
Right, but that goes through the state process.
Yes, definitely, yeah. But they pull us in, so we are part of that process.
Well, and it is a mechanism to bring public art to the community, and if we didn't have any other mechanism to do so, they'll take whatever.
At least there's that, right?
Yes.
So are there any other priority projects or ideas that have been?
Let's do planning. These two guys, I know Mike's got ideas.
You know, our Department of Development Services deals, you know, residential development, commercial development. We have a lot of, you know, pending residential subdivisions, you know, northern slightly. You know, and I think with, you know, our antiquated platting and stuff, you know, wherever these developers can, you know, get bulk land, you know, they put the subdivisions or whatnot. And so creating, you know, the connections between these residential developments and, you know, the established existing parks. I mean, because most of the parks are very nice. And so how do we create, because, you know, in developing it, you know, from a developer standpoint, you know, they work with the 25 acres that they have, and they don't really think about, you know, they put a 6-foot wall around their property and, you know, they're done. You know, if it's over 25 acres, they provide, you know, a certain park within the development. But, you know, thinking of regional connectivity between all the parks, you know, I think is crucial. And because of the lack of development and the open space we have, I think, you know, the corridors between, you know, the drainage and the property that SCAF owns would be a really unique situation. And, you know, thinking of, you know, talking about like the bonds and the money and everything, you know, the way I understand it is, you know, their bottom line is they're all about the GRT, you know, the money that they can, you know, the city makes. And I think by enhancing these corridors, you know, in terms then, you know, will that create future development along these areas where there is, you know, lacking development? and then thinking of it, so then how does it all tie back into place, you know, whether it's walking trails, nodes for, you know, art development or whatever it may be, but, you know, how do we link, you know, this nodal development throughout the city, you know, because everything basically from northern north, I mean, and it's basically spot development, you know, like I said, you know, wherever they could get this bulk land. And, you know, how do we tie these residential developments into, you know, the existing fabric of everything south of northern. And, you know, looking at the map, I think, you know, the location of city center is, geographically, it's the center of the city, but in terms, like, I think this is a crucial spot because you have the schools, you have the open space, you have the recreation fields, you have housing, and you also have some commercial development. And I think by creating, you know, places of value, not in terms of like money production, but places where people can then, you know, walk and interact, you know, to enhance that quality of life. And then, you know, they all kind of, it's like a circle, you know, they all tie back in together.
Yeah, I know, I think when we were on the tour, it was that education corridor seemed like a pretty
Well, you can
rich
see
place for...
It's where our value is. I mean,
Yeah.
we put all our dollars right there, and it shows. I mean,
Now, Michael, when you mentioned, so you do services, the development services, you work with the developers who come in and do the subdivisions. Have you thought, we heard something about how the subdivision rules require all of this landscaping and there's not enough water and blah, blah. Are you thinking about changing the subdivision guidelines or
like the
doing...
DPM as well as the...
Yeah, I mean, right now, our subdivision ordinance definitely needs to be revamped. But I think I would like to see, you know, how, you know, the subdivisions interact with each other. You know, right now we have 4 subdivisions basically, you know, right next to each other, and all of them, you know, that's your typical 6-foot wall between them, and there's, you know, besides the actual right-of-way, you know, they don't interact with each other. And so I think these projects would be good to kind of, you know, change that, or, you know, open the eyes and see, okay, so if this subdivision has a park and this subdivision has a park, why not be able to link those two, you know, through whether it's a walking trail instead of having to drive.
Can I ask a quick question? Are you talking about Stonegate, Salcedo? So the area that he's talking about, there are 4 or 5 subdivisions that are coming up in the near term, which to me could mean 5 to 10 years, or even 2 years. And there is a drainage plan that they all supposedly share or have signed on to. And while some of those properties have been sold due to the housing crisis to other owners, in theory, they're still all signed in to take part in this Edinburgh facility plan, which kind of centers around a regional pond and park. And there's one subdivision, Tierra del Oro, that we deliberately asked them to place their funds and their improvements in the pond or in that park. We tried to ask them to make certain connections, and so if you're talking about something near term, even though developers are in the process of developing it, it might be an opportunity for some student to use that as an example and maybe work with those developers to help hone an idea of how those different facilities or those different subdivisions can merge together. And he's got all the contact information and everything, so.
Yeah, so this is basically where that development is occurring. There's 4 different developments. This is 102 homes, this is 180 homes, this one's like 400, and then this one's going to be 600 to 800. You know, so there's tons of homes. You know, and I mean there are. What's Stonegate's park is?
Well, they're going to have 3 interior parks that are smaller little pocket parks, but the actual regional pond park, you know, it's effectively 6 to 7 acres of usable space. And can I get on my little soapbox for a moment? So the other thing is that we had conducted an assessment of our impact fees, and they were trying to do a review because we were saying, many of the departments were saying our current impact fees are not high enough to actually fund construction of items to standards or standards that are sustainable. something that's going to be a quality product when we get it. And it was interesting because when the analysis was done, they had to do everything based on your history. It couldn't be anything with the cost of the future or the current cost. It's what did you pay, what were your receipts, what did, So going back to eras when they were building something for 83 cents a square foot, who builds a park for 83 cents a square foot? So anyway, we were working with numbers like that, so they basically said, we think your impact fees are too high based on these numbers that are 20 years old. And so they didn't increase the park impact fees, but now we still have people who have to dedicate improved parkland. And so one way that we tried to work with those surrounding communities as those were starting to come in to try and get a quality facility was say, well, put your money into it, because otherwise it's not going to get built, or it's just going to be a giant field of grass that isn't sustainable either because we're having water issues. So that's my little soapbox. It ties back to impact fees and the realistic cost of the infrastructure that we're asking both commercial and residential developers to pay. What's the going market versus what is the actual value? And so there's this kind of a conflict between those two numbers, or a discrepancy in the way they're interpreted. So, sorry, I'm on my soapbox now.
So we briefly talked about the quantity. So from our perspective, the quantity of work that we're being asked to do from Hobbs to Farmington and locally, which is good. That's good. That we can be a resource to the state, and we want to do that. And we talked about, our local commitments as well. I mean, we're sitting in Albuquerque, we're committed to Albuquerque, you're right there as far as we're concerned. So we feel like we have a commitment to work with you on the long term. We're committed partners. We want to work with you over a series of years as long as we need to do this. So you should know that. Please consider us a partner. Now, the flip side of that is how much can we do in any given year and not fall short of either of our expectations of what we're capable of. And that is, I think, one of our challenges as we're trying to, work locally, work in Hobbs and Silver City and all over the place, and don't get that much support from the legislature. So, one of our conversations was this. It seems like this is the time to outline a working plan moving forward, right? You have needs, you have to stack up projects. We need to figure out the priority projects. We'll discuss what priority means and say, okay, it may be that, I'm just going to use this as an example. The first thing that we do is a really detailed mapping of all of these areas. Or maybe we have enough information, maybe you have enough information in terms of mapping, that we don't need to do that. That can go quickly. But then commit to perhaps working on the links between these areas, which seems to be a huge challenge. How do we begin to articulate or link the various parts of Rio Rancho together so we have a plan to work on those? Maybe that touches on the open space issue, and because that's a different kind of way of linking, right? And on and on and on. And we do this over a series of years so that we're not thinking about, okay, we're going to try to do all of this and we're going to be done with this in 2 years. Not possible. So
this is a chemistry set.
Right, this is. And we're with you with that. And so, because what I need to do now that, most of the directors are here and our leadership team is here, is we need to sit down and say, okay, how much can we really pull into our programs and actually accomplish without...
We want us to be a resource to you.
Likewise. Yeah.
This is a lab that's unique, okay? Experiment, take advantage of it, figure out where it fits into your programs.
Well, and one of the things that we've been doing with Albuquerque, and I see the possibility of it happening here as well, is joining with the city, or seeing the city as partners in research projects at a national foundation level. So it might be that some of the faculty might be able to come together with some of your folks and say, okay, we need to come together and this is a great project. We're going to apply to the National Science Foundation, we're going to apply to USDA and get some additional money to do a really proper job here.
If you think about all that is energy, the Arroyos and the participation of Silicon Sandoval. It kind of boosts that.
Right, yes.
That there's
and you get
there's
the
a
kind of
strong partner
technical
there.
infrastructure.
Right.
I see lots of potential in the combination of, looking at this idea of connectivity to do a lot of the...
Well, I think, there are sort of two kinds of approaches that maybe to think about them. I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, but the one approach is what we sometimes call acupuncture. You go in and you take points that are critical points in the fabric, and you really work on those. And the idea is that those points connect to other things, so that as you develop one point and another point and another point, the infill, it facilitates the idea of filling in. The other approach is you look at the corridors, the linear linkages or the kinds of linkages, and you kind of develop the spine, and you hope that things begin to attach onto the spine and develop from the energy of the spine. And as I said, they may not be mutually exclusive, but it might be helpful to sort of think about, as we step back, to think about what sort of approach do we want to take, in looking at this large landscape.
Can I jump in? Because I think there might be a third model here, which is how this land has been settled for a long period of time, which is a set of villages. Then instead of thinking of this as one fabric with holes in it, that it might be, and it kind of is at the moment, a set of nodes, a set of villages.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
And that the connectivity may be not this sort of assumption of the Eastern City model connectivity. It may be that you're really in your neighborhood, your village, your piece, and then you're not, and then you're to another one, but it's a collection of them, it's a federation of them. And that may mean a very different kind of pattern on the ground.
Exactly.
But that really is how this landscape historically was settled. Both, two waves before this current wave, both had that pattern. It's a dry, arid, resource-scarce environment. And I think in the 20th century we kind of scattered as a way to deal with that. You have little isolated pieces all over. Before that, you scattered in nodes. So that might be another approach, which I know that was embedded because I know it was our conversation, but before that, but just to, because I think sometimes the corridors thing is really, comes across as San Francisco.
Like a great streets, right, where you're looking at development on every foot of it.
And the other thing, if you couple Mark's social-cultural overlay on the landscape with what you talked about, which is the ecology of the landscape. I mean, when you think about this landscape and how it becomes naturally populated with vegetation, it's not a forest, right? It's not a dense forest, it's got pieces that sit there. And that's that same model. I mean, so the landscape itself begins to suggest how it would emerge. The ecology, the natural and historic qualities of a place begin to suggest how it might begin to follow a continuum of growth in some way.
You know, it's really intriguing and beautiful. I was listening to this and going back to what Diane had mentioned about defining ourselves about what is constraining us. Is exactly what you're doing right now.
When I was,
Well, but flipping it
This
as an asset.
Sorry, I missed that. Was that a positive comment? Or
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, you know, how you're saying, you know, kind of these villages. And I think one thing that I didn't hear anybody really say is the topography of Rio Rancho, you know, these massive top, you know, at different locations, you could really see different areas. So maybe it's a visual, you know, maybe it's not following these, you know, already established corridors, but maybe it's a visual corridor. And it's funny because, you know, I deal with cell towers too, and, you know, we have a current issue, and so we were thinking of line of sight, so we went up and, you know, hiked up this little hill, and before we didn't think you could see city center from this residential development, but, you know, when you're on the street and on the sidewalk, you can't, but when you get up a little bit, you can, you know, so thinking of, you know, these different villages, but then, like, the visual connection between the two from the different points.
Okay, Jeff, what were you going to say?
I was just going to chime in on top of that. I wrote this down when I looked at this when I came in. Make an asset out of the lack of density. Necklace of dense, sustainable nodes strung together with public transport or bikeable lanes. Develop neighborhoods that have the nodes that each have a unique quality. And keep substantial, more than half of the area open. I mean, truly open, like natural open.
Well, when we were there, I remember I forget how it came up.
I mean, it's just,
and if
when
it
you
was
look at it, that's
discussed
sort
in
of
the
what you
mayor.
got.
But we were talked about the attraction to the area, even whether people living there or not living there for recreation, whether it's hiking or biking, and thought about if you could, you imagine that's the place where the cycling clubs go on the weekend for the big, you know, what are those corridors?
You know, the interesting and great irony is that Rio Rancho is adjacent to Corrales, right? And when people think about Corrales, they think about this very sort of internal place where it's green and there's water and there's, you know, you walkable and all horses, kids are playing, birds are chirping, you know, old churches, as opposed to wide open, all new stuff. I mean, it's in every way kind of this difference. I mean, obviously Corrales was built on a place that happened, you know, 100 years ago or more, many hundreds of years ago. But what is interesting is if you drive all the way through Corrales, boom, all of a sudden you're in Rio Rancho, right? And it's like, whoa. So, I don't know if you have tried and just haven't made any headway, but one thing that seems like a natural is that Rio Rancho would begin to have a very interesting discussion with Corrales about a partnership of two very distinct and different places that represent very different histories in the life of that symbiotic ecosystem, right? And that, in fact, you might be able to maybe find some way of, you know, this becomes the bike club loop, and all of these things happen out in Rio Rancho, and then you swing through, and then you stop in for the Corrales Festival, and just because of the differences. I mean, Albuquerque is very large, right? And now we see it as one big developed place. But one of its advantages is, I mean, the Northeast Heights couldn't be any more different than the valleys, right? They just have developed over time and now are think of themselves as one big place. I would say that soon, Corrales citizenry may pass out at the thought that it will almost become one big place. Why not enter into that conversation? Because really, as you're thinking of this very different situation, it could be very interesting. You have this sort of modern, this is the future, this is a more precious kind of place that we all celebrate. And you could breathe some, Corrales is for sale right now, have you noticed? Has anybody driven through Corrales? It is for sale. You could buy the whole town. Every other building is for sale. They need an infusion of capital like crazy. And what's interesting there is, well, so who's going to be moving in? Is it going to be young families? Is it going to be retirees? So there's an interesting conversation, I think, that happens in terms of that as well. What are the adjacent cities to you? You know?
It's a very big picture when you start looking at it that way. Corrales is converted from an agrarian economy to kind of this, it turned into a suburb.
Yes, it
is. That's fed by, capital from the larger economic sectors around them. The interconnectivity of Corrales, that's already underway. The more, we just built a connection at Northern. You go down Northern and it goes right into Corrales now. And there will be more connections.
But as you begin to create this and try to figure out who you are, I guess what I'm saying is I would not exclude looking at the connections that you have at those points that you butt up to Corrales, that you butt up to Albuquerque, and see that connectivity
And
Bernalillo is really a huge advantage.
It's true.
Well,
Because we're all part of the county
And the
too.
Pueblos.
Yeah, so there's that ultimate connection. And I think one of the other things we didn't talk about, and I think is a key point too, is the dramatic shift in the demographics over the last 20 to 25 years, from being mostly senior citizens to now you've got young professionals raising their children there. I mean, hence the growth of our school district is testimony to that. And there's not much for the youth to do, point one. And if there is, accessibility to it, because they have to have their parents drive them to it. There's only a few skateboard parks, and if you're raising a young man or a young woman that likes to skateboard, and a lot of them do like to do that, the parks aren't, those sites are not really, they go down, my son goes down the hill to Cibola, to go skating. So that's something that, as far as placemaking and tying in the community, that can help too. Having more things for our youth. We're good on senior services, but the youth services and facilities for the youth and putting that into the fabric that we're weaving seems to be a missing component. I mean, we do have our All Abilities Park coming in, but that's just a start, isn't it?
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's the bigger picture that has to be looked at, really, and not just roads and the police force, right? And somehow that has to be communicated. And I don't know if I really know how to say this, but we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the built environment, and we're also been talking about open space, but we're also what activities do we want to see? What type of programming are we looking at? And I think that when we look at a recreational facility, we start with programming before we start with the built environment, and then we define that, and then we go towards what needs to be built or preserved. And when I think about open space, people move to Rio Rancho for different reasons over history, and those reasons are starting to change. The initial reasons why maybe somebody moved to Rio Rancho was because of all of that open space that they could get a four-wheeler out there and they could drive forever. And then maybe 10 more people moved there for that same reason. But when we're talking about sustainability and preservation of an open space system, some of those activities are non-compatible, especially as people move into the area. They may not like those type of activities. And, you know, I really like this conversation. We were talking about defining ourselves in Rio Rancho more than one way. And we're talking about activities that occur in Corrales and how do we complement those in Rio Rancho, and how do we support those activities with our natural and our built environment.
I mean, at this point, an interesting question would even be, how do you become a sustainable city? How? How? At this point, not how would we have become a sustainable city, but really,
Well, what would you define as sustainable for the city?
pardon?
What would you define as sustainable
Well,
for the
it would
city?
have to be at multiple levels. That's the point. It helps you map, you know, your future. If the commitment were, we are going to become, you know, we define the art of sustainability, right? Something like that. And you begin to try to really figure that out at all those different levels. Education, recreation, water, you know, entertainment,
Every subject comes back to
walkability, you know.
I know there's this great temptation to design the project now. And maybe that could happen, and we just do a few more of these and we'll be done. We have about 25 minutes more than anybody has. The maximum
I want
that
to
I'm
hear
having.
Jim say something. Jim,
Oh, and I want to be sure that before, sorry, and so if you want to take a few minutes, I want to be sure, oh gosh, I don't want Mark and Jeff to leave before they can chime in about the kinds of resources or formats that we might bring, because we can keep doing this, but it won't be a project of the school until it gets delegated to some set of actors, whether it's a program or curriculum or, you know, a team of paid students working with, you know, one or more faculty members. So we want to try to get a sense for that component, the very practical of how and when this engagement would start. So Jim.
I have to say, I'm new to Rio Rancho, so I'm not real familiar, and I kind of wish I had an opportunity to review the bikeway and trails plan, but I haven't had that opportunity yet. But with regard to the connectivity, I assume we're talking about trails, multi-use trails, kind of connectivity.
Every kind of.
There's huge potential in Rio Rancho that I can see. And I've worked in Rio Rancho, in Albuquerque for a long time, and I've seen a lot of opportunities lost. You know, just they have an amazing trail system, but it's extremely underutilized, just because of the way that it's built and because of the, you know, you end up having to cross at major arterials and things like that. So if you can kind of get an idea of the places that you're talking about going and the infrastructure that you're going to have to cross or deal with at some point. You know, I tend to be a little technical, but, you know, I've dealt with kind of like the building end of it for a long time, but if you can anticipate where some of these things are going to occur, it becomes less costly to deal with. So that if you have a roadway project and you anticipate a trail or something crossing that roadway, if you know well in advance to anticipate that, then you can include that in your funding proposal to build the roadway. You know, it doesn't become a trail issue. It becomes the roadway issue. It's just part of the roadway. It needs to include this thing.
Yeah.
And so I just see many opportunities for this running into this very situation where, because I think the trail system in Albuquerque is underutilized because of those issues, crossing streets and things, and then when you go to retrofit something, it's hugely expensive. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for spending that kind of money on that kind of thing. And usually the people you see coming out in support of those things tend to be kind of like these fringy IT people that, you know, I mean, that's their thing.
Vocal minorities.
But you kind of wish the general public would come out, you know, the general public, because I don't think they really realize what they're losing when a project goes and it doesn't have this component.
Right.
Because they don't miss it because it was never there, and so they just think, well, they don't think.
Yeah.
They just think that's the way it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to
So
anticipate where these things are gonna go and where you wanna put various things. And I wanted to say, I worked in Rio Rancho about 13 years ago, and it used to be, you know, you'd drive into Rio Rancho and you wouldn't even know you were driving into Rio Rancho.
So I would get those entryway signs.
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
You are entering Rio.
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, it's the little things that have a big impact on people's lives, and that welcome monument just in the median of Unser, it had a huge impression on me. I was thinking, wow, I'm driving in Rio Rancho. And it,
I want to work here.
you know, it really did. I really did have that.
And it did have a huge impact because it was on the cover of every little magazine that any little group in Rio Rancho ever produced for a couple of years.
Right.
You take a picture of that and you're here now. Sorry.
So bookmark on your way out, do you have a minute?
Yeah, I can.
See something else on the way out?
I have one design pattern for you that we almost got in the Northeast Heights, which works for connectivity really well if you follow it. No dead-end sidewalks. It means the connectivity to the trail works. Just walk it through in your ordinance for a while and watch what it does. In terms of resources, when you brought up the community health aspect, component of it, we do have a new Masters of Science in Architecture track on the built environment and health. We're interviewing 2 students next week, so there may be a possibility there. They need to do a project. I think.
So they'd be graduate students, obviously, with designing.
We just had this discussion about a National Science Foundation grant on urban resiliency, so I think if that group can get its act together again to apply for next year, I think there's some opportunities there. And then I just had a student graduate in our certificate program who did a public art master plan for the west side of Albuquerque. Very similar sets of issues. We may, as those students come up, there is a kind of public art component theme in the certificate also. So looking at this idea of how could public art be those critical little seeds for nodes or entryways or whatever, I think is another kind of possibility that I see. And then there's full-on studio, but I'll let somebody else talk about that.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to run.
Thank you.
So we haven't heard from Rick yet. Rick, are you there? Rick, take on. Rick.
Okay, Jeff.
Okay, Jeff, your turn. Then Rick.
Depending on what it is.
City center. Those are kind of micro projects, but they're. You can look at examples around the country where medical centers have a big impact on them. They become the driving force.
Yeah, and then we have members of our faculty that would be potentially interested in a project at that scale. And potentially interested in projects at other scales as well, but sort of need to define what those things are, and I think that maybe this group at some point can start to develop a list and the priorities for what it is that you want to do, and we can start to think about how quickly we could start to plug some of those holes in.
Is there an example of like a project that you would have in mind that might work?
Well, for example, Roger Schluntz just taught a studio last semester where they were looking at just over the freeway from here, where they're proposing a new incubator for, between the city and the university to develop startup businesses and that sort of thing. And so they looked at a whole, I don't know, 5 or 6 square block area.
The Innovate Albuquerque.
So like laying out how that area.
Yeah, looking at,
Master plan.
master planning, kind of, and multiple different versions of that. So, each student or group of students would work on a different portion of it, and so you get some sort of notion about how it might start to play out. And I think there's any number of possibilities, depending on the scale of starting to do that. So you start to get something that you can look at. It's not necessarily what you're going to be doing per se, but it starts to give you, something that's physical and there and you can talk about.
It does, it lifts the conversation, and, for Rio Rancho, we do so many things, education-wise.
When on the way out, you can see the model, the base model they built for that, and the way they plugged in, and stuff like that. We can just
And the
down
next,
way out.
I think the next step for that particular exercise is to look at the rail yards, for example. Some of you are familiar with the rail yards, and to see how we might be able to, again, from Innovate Albuquerque and that whole area along Central, begin to maybe create a way of moving from the rail yard project, which is now, on track to get redeveloped, to the Innovate Albuquerque site. So we create another link through the downtown area and begin to talk to the neighborhood and see what that's going to mean to them. And so what are the architecture projects, the landscape architecture projects, the planning work that needs to be done to do all of this in conjunction with the city. So that those are projects that we...
I know we've done them in the past. I don't know that we've done one all that recently, but when the UNM Rio Rancho site was being worked on, there was a big design charrette, and it takes getting some money together to, you can get a chunk of funds together, and you can bring some folks in from the outside, and you put together a working group, and they work on it really hard for 3 or 4 days or whatever, and that might be a way of kicking the thing off and starting to think about how do you start to build a framework that, and give it enough time to really sink some thought into it and come up with a list of things to do.
But I really do think we need to have a similar exercise where we're not just looking at potentials, but actually itemizing some, even if it's a list of 10 and only 2 or 3 of them rise to the top immediately, so we can say, okay, next fall, let's see if we can find some, planning studio or architect, depending on what, or a collaborative studio where we look at X, right? Because we're planning studios out in advance, and the hardest thing in the world is to come up to a director or a faculty member and say, next semester this is what you're going to be doing, and then they say, no, I don't say.
The happiest snenario is when there's a list of opportunities and a faculty member says, oh yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah, that would,
and so they feel strongly about it.
And that'll give you the best results.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Ray,
But there are other...
we only have a few minutes here. You want to jump in terms of your planning perspective here?
Sure.
What resources you think that the planning program might be able to bring to bear?
So, the community and regional planning program has been involved in Rio Rancho in the past. We did an advanced planning studio many years ago, which led to the now term City of Vision. We had 15 students and 2 or 3 faculty for a semester looking at the city and at the place and the identity and on. I personally been involved with the water department, doing the citizen participation on planning for the extension of the water system. That was a real-time consulting project with the engineering firm. We led the city. We, several students, 2 other part-time instructors, and myself. The city center was the result of a charrette held here. I think it cost around $50,000. And the dean and the university and the then vice president for finance brought together a national team and spent 3.5 days looking at the design of the new city center. That was followed by a second national charrette on UNM West, the design of the academic center within the city center. UNM West continues, and I sit on the planning committee for that. There's an inter-university administrative task force. We work in one of 4 modes, the planning program and its faculty. We have courses. These are 3-unit courses that an instructor teaches, which will, if it has the timing and the wherewithal, have a service learning component. Usually 10 to 17 students. Second, Jeff has alluded to it, we teach once a year. Architecture and landscape architecture teach many, many more studios, and I can't speak for the way they choose or do them. The hours are interdisciplinary across our curriculum and often interdisciplinary between the programs. We like those to be funded at one of 2 levels, either materials, travel, and supplies, $5,000 to $5,000. Or, and the instructor and I will say better yet, funded to include the university's overhead, a salary for, if it's summer, the instructor and a couple of graduate students, and you're looking at $15,000, maybe $20,000. Then we have 2 other ways we work. Every one of our students are required to do a thesis or a professional project. You could probably go to our archives and pull out 1 or 2, 3 theses or professional projects on Rio Rancho. With city center, walkability, the walkability and extension of the old antiquated subdivisions or the new master planned areas as the city grows. Then there's research, applied research, and we have 8 faculty, all of whom we ask to be engaged in research. And it's either funded or it's unfunded. And nowadays, we almost always ask them to have funded research. And they will in turn assemble a team of graduate students, maybe all planners, maybe students from different disciplines, including this school and other parts of the university. And they want support, the individual faculty member, because they're working over the summer, usually, and they're not paid. And we push on them to say, that's good, and we also want to be able to pay the dean and the provost and others who build this building where we work overhead. So, and I have to tell you, we do unfunded research. Way to go, Rick. Talking with my hands. We do unfunded research, service learning, and service to the community. So, given the right context, one of our faculty sits on the City County Water Board. there would be a time when she wants some students to help her with a policy problem. One of our another, I won't go through the faculty, but each of us works outside the program, either on a university-funded personal consulting or service to the community and the profession basis. And it will vary faculty member to faculty member, natural resources, community development, or physical planning and design. Those are our concentrations. There are 2 centers in the school. One is called the Indigenous Planning Design Institute. That's a funded research institute that focuses 99 and 44/100% on indigenous planning, Native American issues. Ted Hohola, who ran that, was this instructor on the City of Vision studio. Then we have the Resource Center for Raza Planning, and they work typically with traditional Hispanic or communities, and in areas where there are traditional communities and areas. And you know what Ted said when he did it, when he worked to lead our planning studio? He said, this is a growing place. It is a very, very deeply traditional city. It's just not ours. And don't we have a stake in what's right? Santa Clara to the north and Isleta to the south. Don't we just an interest in what's going on? And when you look at water and when you look at land, we all do. So those 2 centers rarely work on a pro bono basis, but they both do when the opportunity is there. They have other funding for graduate students that they hire outside of class. And a student is $4,000 or $5,000 a semester. It's a lot of money for a student. The last thing I'll say is we need, on initiatives like this, 6 to 9 months lead time. Because we're planning for that next semester 6 to 9 months ahead of its. And when it comes to summer work, we really must be supportive. Unless the dean has something I know of, or the provost has something I don't know of, don't know of. At a minimum, my instructors want materials, travel, and supplies. And nowadays, I'm saying, where was your salary again? Who was paying that? Like, you really, are you going to go out there for free? And they either say yes or no. They either look at me like, you're not going to pay it? And I'll say, no. You have a 9-month contract. I'm not going to pay it. So, those are the kinds of things we do, and some of the increasingly important ground rules. I probably ought to leave it there. The planning program has a presence and a history with people who preceded you. And some people who are still there, I recognize your face. Rio Rancho's fascinating because it is what it is. You guys invent yourself about every 5 years. Reinvent yourself. And I don't know many communities that do that. It's just absolutely fascinating. Thanks. There you go.
Thank you, Ray.
And in following up on this presentation, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, we don't want to do another plan that's going to go in a box and start collecting dust.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I start thinking about making a difference, a real difference, and how do we do that? And when you put people in outside of their comfort level, then you start getting people's attention. And how do you do that? And I'm starting to think by review of policies and plans and ordinances that actually guide development. And
That's why you guys are here?
yeah.
That's why we want you, and that's
And
why
I'm thinking about this city center plan that UNM was involved in, and I'm saying, nobody's paying any attention to that. You know, if we've got this large company that wants to come in and settle at the city center area, what do you think is going to drive the decision? It's going to be finances. Exactly. And you know what? City center is going to develop just like Rio Rancho is developing. It just is by finances. The decisions are based on economics, and so I think, and the council is actually bringing up our, what do they call our sector plans, or
Yeah, basically,
they want to do away with our area. Yeah, totally. Just do away with them, and just and because they don't think they're development friendly.
Yeah, I mean, basically what they want to look at, you know, removing some of these design and architectural standards. You know, they think it's, you know, puts a burden on development, but, you know, to kind of piggyback off, I just add this in real quick. You know, I think when I was looking for jobs and I seen Rio Rancho, you know, being a local, you know, I think, you know, even growing up and seeing like the different development and, you know, all the vast open area, I think Rio Rancho really has a unique opportunity because most cities are, you know, either fully developed or pretty close to being, you know, at capacity. And Rio Rancho was 50% developed and 50% undeveloped, and kind of thinking of it as, you know, we have these kind of nodes now, and thinking of, have you guys seen the pegboard that you see at a restaurant? You know, you jump these pegs to, you know, thinking of them as these developments, but then thinking of them as connectivity. You know, you jump from this one to this one, so that connection is done, and the ultimate goal is to create something that's, you know, completely intertwined, or, you know, one solution, which is definitely, obviously, in a perfect world you have one perfect solution, but, you know, that's might be far-fetched, but I think the project really has an opportunity because Rio Rancho is a very unique situation, or has a very unique situation, a problem. Is it a problem? Maybe to some, but is it something that could be a unique situation that maybe somebody else hasn't done, you know, thinking of it in terms of development, you know, say from south of southern, you know, mostly developed, you know, so you kind of limited on connectivity points. But in terms of the area that's undeveloped, you know, thinking outside the box, and like how you said, comfort zone, you know, like the 3 years I was here at UNM, they taught us so much, you guys taught us so much to, you know, don't think about, you know, these policies and stuff. Think out you don't have a budget and you don't have something, and I think,
Well,
you know, ultimately we do have a budget now, but, you know, pushing that boundary and.
but one of the interesting things that and unfortunately, Alf, you and I are going to have to excuse ourselves pretty quickly, but, yeah, so, for city staff, I mean, talking to the city council is key in terms of making them also understand. I know it's tough. It's like for us talking to upper administration, which we do all the time and wins at the same time. But making them understand, you know, the legal implications of writing some of these development standards that have no water underlying them. No, I mean, you know, things that are they are going to have some, I mean, these have legal implications for them if they don't pay attention to what they're discounting or not paying, or, so, you know, there's that. I would again say our next task is to simply sit down and say, okay, now we've talked, we've heard what we can do, we've heard what we can't do. I mean, some of it, you know, was disjointed and it doesn't matter. And say, okay, here's what we think we can do. Let's itemize these projects, let's pick one, and let's start. And let's figure out when we're going to calendar it, and let's just go.
And
We gotta start.
I
We would like
think
to do
there's
that.
some understanding that calendaring, you know, would probably not be before the fall this year.
No, it's impossible because we're
And-
starting again.
I thought fall maybe, we'd be lucky if we get fall, if we get spring, we're cool with that.
Well, and good planning is key to the long-term successful relationships. So we can use the summer. We're here, you know, the faculty may not be, but the admin staff, the admin team is, you know, here in and out, but we can still meet
So
and
we'll-
do some planning.
We'll develop a planning group on our side, some key people.
Yeah.
From key sectors, and then let's plan our next meeting, and it'll be a planning session.
And if you guys could work on really what are the priority things where you would like to start,
Yes.
and where you think funding or support might come from. And then we'll do the same kind of thing, you know, with at least
That's perfect.
structural strategy. And I just say, as Michael knows, that one of the strengths of this program, you were talking about all the plans on the shelves gathering dust, is that visualization is really our strength. That we can take those planning concepts but turn them into pictures that have form, color, texture, and people in them that people get excited about. And you know, as also Michael knows from the TFAC studios and others, when people have seen these things, you know, you go back to that community a couple years later and you see something that looks like that sometimes, very often. So in terms of moving from plan to action, I think it's a really important thing. And it's also what energizes the students and the faculty.
I want to thank you all very much.
Thank
I know
you
it's
very
a
much.
huge commitment of
Looking
time
forward to it.
and staff and energy. And, you know, again, this has got to be a long-term partnership, and we're committed.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you.